We cherish freedom of speech in this country. We even protect the ability of those in Congress to speak freely, even exempting them from arrest or questioning what they say in either the House or the Senate. But what Representative Henry Johnson Jr. and his 12 co-sponsors have proposed in H.R. 5717 is not only a violation of the law, but a violation of the very purpose of the federal government, as stated in the U.S. Constitution. So we'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
One thing you have to know wherever you make your stand came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, where we teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. As always, I'm going to point you over to that website, constitutionstudy.com. It's where you'll find everything that's going on with the Constitution Study. It's also where you can sign up for the newsletter and get your chance at a discounted version of my book. That's right. The book will be launched. It will release on May 4th. But you can buy an early copy at a discount on the website, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll find out more. As always, I want to thank everybody that helped share this information, people who comment, who ask questions, who ask questions through the website, who share me on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're seeing this. I thank you, and I hope you're enjoying these. I hope you continue to support and to share the work that we're doing here so that we can teach the rising generation to live free. So we begin to understand again liberty and rights and the actual role of the governments we created. So let's talk about H.R. 5717, the Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act of 2020. Now, according to Representative Johnson and from his bill, the purpose of the bill is to, quote, end the epidemic of gun violence and build safer communities by strengthening federal firearms laws and supporting gun violence research, intervention, and prevention initiatives. All right, let's start with the reason for this bill, to end the epidemic of gun violence. Well, Mr. Johnson, you're too late. The epidemic of gun violence is already over, except in certain large cities. See, especially those that have strict gun control laws. See, according to FBI statistics, both murder and violent crime as a whole are down over the last decade. And while every crime is a tragedy to those involved, claiming there is an epidemic of gun violence is not only fraudulent, but it ignores the number of times a gun is used to save lives and to protect the innocent. Which brings me to the build safer communities Mr. Johnson claims his bill will promote. How does keeping life-saving tools out of the hands of law-abiding citizens make them safer? Do you really think the store owner, or the person walking down the street, or the mother at home will be safer if they have to wait for police to arrive and save them from a violent criminal? Do these congressmen and women believe that violent criminals will abide by these laws they want to put in place? If that were the case, why don't they focus their ire on those committing the gun violence rather than on innocent, everyday Americans? It appears Mr. Johnson and his co-sponsors are simply ignoring facts they find inconvenient. Facts like the Second Amendment, which reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And Webster's 1828 dictionary defines infringe as, quote, to break as contracts, to violate either positively by contravention or negatively by non-fulfillment or neglect of performance. See, the Constitution that Mr. Johnson and his co-sponsors swore to support clearly states that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, it shall not be broken or violated either by contravention or neglect of performance. Yet the first thing Mr. Johnson wants to do in his legislation is infringe on your right to own firearms by making you get permission from the federal government to exercise that right. Title 1 of the legislation, Federal Firearms Licensing. Quote, except otherwise provided in this section, it shall be unlawful for any individual who is not licensed under this section to knowingly purchase, acquire, or possess a firearm or ammunition. In short, you will not be able to own or even possess a firearm unless you get a license, unless you get permission from the federal government. Imagine if you needed the Fed's permission to exercise any other right. Imagine I needed a federal license to post this video, or that you needed one to speak in public. What if you needed the government's permission to petition that government for a redress of your grievance, or to practice your religion as you see fit? See, I doubt most of us would stand for that, but Mr. Johnson expects us to come to him and the rest of those we have hired to represent us and beg permission to exercise our unalienable right to self-defense with whatever tool we deem necessary. This bill, should it become law, is not only a violation of the supreme law of the land, it is a poke into the eye to the very idea of the rule of law. Title II deals with background check reform. Quote, beginning on the date that is 180 days after the date of enactment of the Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act of 2020, it shall be unlawful for any person who is not a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer to transfer a firearm to any other person who is not so licensed unless a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer has first taken possession of the firearm for the purpose of complying with subsections. You see, after ensuring that you get the government's permission to own a firearm, Mr. Johnson wants to make sure you get their permission to buy or sell one as well. Now, ignoring the inconvenient fact that any sale that takes place within a state's border is not subject to federal regulation, that's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, people, we once again have Congress attempting to violate our unalienable right to live free by requiring we get their permission before we engage in commerce. Anyone who believes that those who commit these violent crimes Mr. Johnson claims to be so concerned about would bother following such laws, well, they have a serious inability to grasp reality. Face it, folks, these two sections of the law have nothing to do with controlling violent crimes. Instead, they're about controlling the American people. Now, Title III is minimum age for purchasing firearms and ammunition. Mr. Johnson wants it to be illegal, quote, for any person to transfer, sell, trade, give, transport, or deliver any firearm or ammunition to any person who the transfer knows or has reasonable cause to believe is less than 21 years of age. See, not only does Mr. Johnson believe you need to get the federal government's permission to own a firearm, he believes they are best able to determine when you're old enough to do so. Now, since the Constitution does not give the federal government any authority to regulate firearms, this is another violation of the 10th Amendment's prohibition against exercising powers not delegated to them by the Constitution. Then we have Title IV, Extreme Risk Protection Orders. Quote, the Director of the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services of the Department of Justice shall establish a program under which, for amounts made available to carry out this section, the Director may make grants to eligible entities to assist in carrying out the provisions of the legislation described in this section. Okay, that's a bit of legalese. Now, I've talked before about the illegal aspects and the outright dangers of red flag laws, their abuse, even previous attempts of those in Congress to bribe states to enact them. So I'm not surprised to see Mr. Johnson trying to add to this list of abuses of power to use legislation not authorized by the Constitution, to spend money beyond what the Congress is authorized to do by the Constitution, and to persuade states to enact unconstitutional and illegal laws prohibited by the Constitution. I know you're not supposed to repeat a word so often in a sentence, but I want you to see just what Mr. Johnson is proposing in this legislation. It is nothing less than the subversion of self-government, the rule of law, and lacks any shred of concern for what the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, says. Title V is the assault weapons and firearm silencer and muffler ban. Quote, it shall be unlawful for a person to import, sell, manufacture, transfer, or possess in any affecting interstate or foreign commerce a semi-automatic assault weapon. Mr. Johnson and his co-sponsors don't want you to be able to possess certain firearms. Now, based on what is in this bill, it's not a question of lethality, a history of being used in crime, or any other logical or rational reason. No, it appears Mr. Johnson just doesn't like these guns and doesn't think you should have them. Furthermore, he believes the government has the authority to tell you what you can and cannot own. A scary weapon is not all he's coming after, but firearm mufflers and magazines as well. So, Mr. Johnson, now you have proven you don't care what the Constitution says. So tell me, how putting a muffler on a firearm makes it less lethal? How does helping to protect the hearing of millions of American gun owners supposed to make them dangerous criminals? And how is limiting the size of certain magazines supposed to keep us safe? Now, whether through ignorance, arrogance, or both, it's men like Mr. Johnson that are making communities less safe. Title VI is firearm trafficking. Quote, it shall be unlawful to sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of a firearm in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce to any person who is not licensed under Section 923, knowing or having reasonable cause to believe that such a person purchased a firearm during the 30-day period ending on the date of such sale or disposition. Now, heaven forbid you should go to the gun store and see more than one firearm you want to purchase. Or as I've done in the past, purchase matching firearms for myself and a family member. See, this is just another part of this abominable legislation meant to regulate the American people. And don't let that affecting interstate commerce language fool you. Congress has the authority to regulate actual interstate commerce, not anything that might affect it. This is a naked attempt to make it appear that this pile of garbage is being made pursuant to the Constitution. It is not. Title VII is dealer reform. Not later than 1 year after the date of enactment of this subsection, the Attorney General shall prescribe such regulations as are necessary to ensure that any premises at which a licensed dealer deals in firearms are secure from theft, which shall include requiring 1. Compliance with the security plan submitted by the licensed dealer pursuant to Section 923D1G. 2. The use of locked metal cabinets and fireproof safes. 3. Security systems, video monitoring, and anti-theft alarms. 4. Security gates, strong locks, and site hardening. And 5. Concrete bollards and other access controls if necessary. Mr. Johnson and his co-sponsors not only don't believe that you're responsible enough to exercise your right to keep and bear arms, they also don't believe gun stores know how to safely store their own inventory. Once again, Mr. Johnson simply ignores the fact that the Constitution does not delegate to Congress the authority to regulate business. It does not. Title VII continues with the mandated annual inspection of high-risk licensed dealers, triennial inspection of other licensed dealers. Quote, Section 923 of Title 18 U.S.C. is amended by adding at the end the following, quote, the Attorney General shall without such reasonable cause or warrant, 1. Annually inspect or examine the inventory records and business premises of each licensed dealer whom the Attorney General determines is a high-risk dealer, based on the considerations used to do so as of the date of the enactment of this sentence. And 2. Triennially inspect and examine the inventory records and business premises of any other licensed dealer that the Attorney General determines is not a high-risk dealer. See, here Mr. Johnson simply wants to ignore the Fourth Amendment. Just completely. He does it by ordering the Attorney General without reasonable cause or warrant, as is those words, to inspect, i.e. to search, the business records of firearms on a regular basis. Then we have Title VIII, called Industry Reform. Sections 2, 3, and 4 of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act are repealed. She'll often referred to as the firearm manufacturers being exempt from consumer protection laws. What this law actually did was protect them from malicious lawsuits. Several organizations and cities attempted to put firearms manufacturers out of business by suing them, claiming that they were responsible for the illegal use of their legal product. Imagine someone suing Ford or Chevrolet because a drunk driver killed someone while operating one of their vehicles. Imagine if the manufacturer of the truck used in the Oklahoma City bombing could be held responsible for the lives lost. Those who don't want the people to own firearms have been misrepresenting and abusing this law since its inception. Now Mr. Johnson and his co-sponsors want people to be able to sue companies who have made a legal product without defect simply because some third party used it for an illegal purpose. This is simply a vindictive and reprehensible attempt to manipulate the law and to target a specific industry for destruction. Title VIII continues, quote, there is hereby imposed upon the sale by the manufacturer, producer, or importer of the following articles a tax equivalent to the specified percent of the price for which so sold. And of course, let's face it, no sweeping attempt to subvert the Constitution would be complete without imposing another illegal tax. Congress has no authority to tax sales, only imports. But hey, Mr. Johnson and his crew, they've spent so much time finding ways to trash the very law that created their offices. Why should we be surprised at just one more? It is hard for me to describe just how vile and disgusting this piece of legislation is. I don't think there is one title in it that does not treat the U.S. Constitution like a piece of toilet paper to be used and thrown away. I do not use that metaphor lightly. This legislation overturns the rule of law, subverts the blessings of liberty, and treats the American people like subjects of a kingdom rather than citizens of a free state. This is yet another step in the destruction of the experiment in self-government started almost 250 years ago. While not technically treason, this is as close to declaring war on the American Republic as just about any other legislation I've reviewed on this website or on this channel. These people who claim to represent the citizens of their district are acting like rulers over them, and this legislation protects no one while trampling on the rights and liberties of millions of Americans. These people are not acting like representatives in a constitutional republic, but like an aristocracy telling the people what they can do and how they can live. If you live in Georgia's 4th District or the district of any of the co-sponsors, I want to ask you several questions. Do these people truly represent you? Do you want to live in a free country governed by laws, or one ruled by Washington, D.C. and governed by the whim of these men and women? What good are your rights if you won't stand up and defend them? Even if you don't like guns, are you willing to become serfs to a ruling class who can take away any of your rights by simply passing some legislation? Because if they can do this to your right to keep and bear arms, they will one day do it for your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, your freedom of the press, to peaceably assemble, to petition, your security from unreasonable search and seizure, your trial by jury, your assistance of counsel, your right to private property, etc., etc., etc. If we let them get away with this, then the experiment in self-government is dead. The Constitution literally means nothing if we will let legislatures simply ignore it and rewrite it. And it's about time the American people said, that's enough. You will abide by your oath of office, you will abide by the supreme law of the land, or we will remove you. We will alter or abolish a government until we get one that protects our rights. Yeah, this thing got me fired up. The more I read through this legislation, the madder I got. This really torqued me off. Not simply because it's an attack on guns. I like my guns. I use my guns. I think they're wonderful. But it's not simply an attack on guns. It's an attack on the Constitution. It's an attack on the concept of a constitutional republic. It's an attack on the very foundation of this country, that we the people establish governments through a constitution, that those governments will be maintained within the bounds of that constitution, and when they step outside of the bounds, they get slapped. Well, it's about time the American people stop putting up with the tyrants in Washington, the tyrants in our state houses, who are telling us the Constitution doesn't matter, and we start slapping them around. We have the right, we have the duty to alter or abolish our government when it infringes on our rights, when it destroys our blessing of liberty, and that's what's happening here. The question is, will you do something about it? Will you go to your congressman or congresswoman? Will you get in their face and say, ain't no way, buddy, you swore an oath to support the Constitution. This violates it in so many ways. Take my article, give them a list. Tell them their job is on the line. Tell them they're literally violating their oath of office and their job is on the line, because that's about the only thing that's going to get their attention. Will we do that? Or will we sit back and play keyboard warrior and whine and complain while our rights and our liberties and the Constitution are used to wipe the backsides of these people and then thrown away? Because if we decide the latter, if we sit back and let the country continue, the government of this country continue to trash our rights, to trash the Constitution that created it, our children and our grandchildren will curse us for our lack of moral fiber, our lack of character, and our unwillingness to protect the inheritance that we received that we will one day pass on to them, and rightfully so. If we let this legislation pass, I'm disgusted with America, because we have decided we would much rather be fat, dumb, and happy watching our Netflix and our social media than actually protecting the rights and the liberties that allowed those things to come to pass in the first place. This is not just another gun control bill, folks. This is literally a fight for the soul of America. Will it be we the people, or will it be the aristocrats in Washington that decide our fate? The answer is up to you, and it's up to me. But it's not going to happen by itself. So hopefully you've got some good information. Hopefully you got some talking points. Head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Take this article with the video attached, send it to your congressman, your congresswoman, and let them know their job is on the line. And hopefully you found the information good enough that I'll see you again the next time on the Constitution Study.
Thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long